Claustrophobia, a morbid fear of being closed in a confined space. A fear that while I don't personally share myself, and maybe some of you watching this don't feel the same way about it as I do, it is a very common phobia that people are very, very well aware of. In fact, if I was to ask you guys to name off a phobia off the top of your head, you would probably list claustrophobia as the first thing to come to your mind. Unless you are one of those weird people that thought of that fear of olives.
Do you eat olives?
No, we can't even down the aisle.
Okay. Now, you can't even go down the aisle of a grocery store? Mary, you won't let go of me.
Oh, yeah.
Bring out the olives.
I'm going to hell. Regardless, though, what if I told you about a story that involved a group of people who, through some sort of supernatural compulsion, caused them to insert themselves into confined spaces for reasons against their own will. And once inserted into said space, there was no way out, and, well, why spoil it so soon? This is the Enigma of Amigara Fault by Junji Ito. Like last time, we are going to cover a short story by Junji Ito, and this one in particular is considered by fans to be one of the most horrifying stories ever written by Junji Ito. And to be honest, that's a pretty high bar. Now, is that an opinion I share? Well, we'll get to that later. Funny enough, when it comes to people's first introduction to the world of Junji Ito and his stories, this happens to be the most referenced as being the entry point into his works of horror. Well, funny enough, in the West, the story you find this in, Gyo, which happens to be the last chapter in said book, many people have cited as that story alone being the sole reason to pick up Gyo in the first place, which almost sounds like a slap in the face to Gyo. I don't think it is, but I also understand why that sentiment appears that way. Real talk, if I had to be honest, if I had to rank the top 3 Junji Ito stories, or series rather, like Uzumaki, Gyo, and Tomie, in my eyes, it would probably go Uzumaki, Tomie, and then Gyo. Not to say Gyo is bad by any means. I like Gyo, but after reading most of his works over the years, it's safe to say that of all his bigger works, and if you were to ask me for recommendations, Gyo would probably be the one I would recommend the least. Because it's not going to be to everyone's taste, even though I wouldn't kick it out of the bed for eating crackers. I think it's a good story in and of itself. But let's circle back to the Enigma of Amigara Fault. Why is this story considered to be one of the scariest stories Junji Ito ever wrote? Well, like I said at the beginning, this story is a take on the fear of being in confined spaces, which I can understand why that would terrify people. But it also deals with another thing: compulsion. The feeling of being drawn to something for reasons even you don't understand. And it's a feeling you've probably felt. You've probably at some point in your life or another have seen something on the side of the road or on the side of the sidewalk, and for some reason you just walk over it and pick it up, only to ask yourself, why did I do that? It's a feeling pretty much everyone can say they have had at least once in their life, as if some unseen force was guiding your hand seemingly against your will, only to question afterwards why you would even do such a thing to begin with. This story deals with both of those things, and it makes for a very good horror story. Well, without further ado, this is the Enigma of Amigara Fault.
But first, airtime.
Yo, it's Axecept back with a personal sponsorship. Me? Did you know that over 70% of people that watch my videos aren't even subscribed to the channel? And if you're one of those people, what are you doing?
Go to your room and stand in the corner. No dinner for you tonight.
Seriously, it costs nothing to simply hit that subscribe button down below and hit the notification bell to be notified of my future videos to come. So, if you are a repeat offender of watching my content and you still haven't subscribed, or you are a first time watcher and at any point you like this video and you want to see more, hit that button down below and hit the bell. For the low cost of free with promo code subscribe to my channel, please. Not only will you be supporting my channel, but will also be notified the next time I upload a video, stream, or put out community posts to update you guys on future videos. With all that said, I hope your day is going well, and thank you for watching. Let's get back to the video.
Right, where was I?
The story starts off somewhere near an unspecified region of Japan, where the narration states that numerous towns and villages in this prefecture of Japan were devastated during an earthquake. However, something interesting happened though. As a result of the earthquake, a deep fault line opened up in the mountains nearby the epicenter of the earthquake on the north slope of Amigara Mountain. We then meet our primary protagonist, a young man hiking his way up the mountain to see the fault in the mountainside of Amigara, to which he lays eyes on a young lady also hiking up the mountain. The young man yells out to say hello to the woman, to which he introduces himself to her as Owaki. He asks who she is, to which she replies her name is Yoshida. He asks her if she was on the way to see the fault as well, thinking aloud that it would make the most sense as she doesn't see many young females hiking alone. Yoshida mentions she saw it on TV, and laying eyes on it made her restless, knowing that she had to go and see it for herself. Owaki responding that he felt the same way as well. They continue to hike up the mountain until they start to hear voices over the ridgeline, Owaki speculating that it must be other gawkers who came to see the fault as well, saying to Yoshida that heading that direction is the best bet, because if he's hearing other people nearby, the fault must be too. They hike nearer to the voices of people gathered nearby, to which we see a panel of Owaki's face, seemingly shocked by the sight of what he sees, to which we get a full page of the fault line from Owaki's perspective, not only seeing a bunch of people gathered near the fault line in the side of the mountain, but in the side of the mountain itself are holes. But not just any holes, but holes shaped in the silhouette of human beings. And there are a lot of them. Owaki remarks that this is exactly like what he saw on the TV, but even more amazing up close. Owaki, in sheer amazement of what the holes actually mean and wondering how long those holes were in the side of the mountain for all this time, and curious as to what they were for. He then sees a group of individuals wearing hard hats studying the holes up close, to which he speculates must be researchers from the nearby university. We then cut to a panel from the researcher's perspective, getting a more up close and personal look of the holes, sticking a fiberscope down the man-shaped hole, one of the researchers noting that the hole goes down so deep into the mountainside that even the 30-meter fiberscope they brought isn't long enough to reach the end, although noting that the holes are curving off inside the mountains, saying that there is no way this could possibly be a natural formation of the rock, and that someone or something must have dug them out by hand. Although one of the researchers remarking how would it be possible to do with rock this solid, and besides, if this was man-made, there would have been some trace of an entrance somewhere. The head researcher speculating the entrance was probably sealed up due to an accumulation of soil over the many years, and that these holes are probably ancient. We then cut back to Owaki and Yoshida, the latter going up close to the holes to get a better look for herself, Owaki telling her to be careful. However, Yoshida doesn't really respond. Owaki asks her what she's doing, as if she was looking for something specifically, to which Yoshida responds with, "I saw it on TV." Owaki, rightfully confused, asks her to clarify what she meant, to which she says that on TV, she saw one of the holes, a specific hole, but only caught a glimpse. But this was enough to compel her to make the trek all the way up to the mountain to see if she could find it. Owaki, again confused, asks her what about this hole was so special that it compelled her to come all the way up here. To which she says something odd. He says, "It was in my shape." Owaki is even more confused by this, Yoshida continuing her statement by saying that the hole she saw was not only identical, but was specifically made in her silhouette, like it was based on her likeness. Owaki doesn't buy this, as even he mentions that these holes had to have been made eons ago, to which, if that's the case, how could a hole made that long ago be made specifically for her? Even going on to say that it may be a tad on the egotistical side to think that, which, talk about being blunt, Owaki. This causes her to snap a bit, telling Owaki to not make fun of her, convinced that she knows it's for her, and that it doesn't have to make sense.
Women.
We then see another panel where a man seemingly overheard what they were saying, the man telling her that he felt the same way, that he also saw a hole on TV that looked just like him, and came on up to the mountain to search for his hole, introducing himself as Nakagaki. 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 Yeah, there we go. I got it right. That's such a tongue twister of a name. He also mentions that the other people that came to see the holes like him seemingly came up the mountain for a very similar reason, remarking how unbelievable of a phenomenon this is, that all these people came up to the mountain for the same reason as he did. Nakagaki, though, says something peculiar. He finally found his, pointing to a hole right next to the three, remarking that it looks exactly like him. Owaki just stares at him with a look of disbelief, as this would make any reasonable person to question the validity of this. However, the man looking to prove this belief takes off his clothes, minus his underwear. Of course, this is a Christian channel. Walks to the hole and inserts himself into it, to which he does, in fact, fit perfectly in the hole. But right as he does this, he seemingly starts to be sucked into the hole, which of course startles Owaki, pleading with the man to get out of the hole, as this is clearly dangerous, but to no avail. Owaki then turns to the crowd of people asking for help to see if someone could be able to get that man out. The researchers jump to their aid by sticking the fiber scope down the hole to see if they could find him. However, if you remember, their fiber scope can only go so far as 30 meters. And by then, they found no trace of him whatsoever, saying that if the scope at its limit couldn't find him, then he must be much further down the hole, declaring an emergency, calling for a rescue squad. The rescue squad arrives along with a news crew reporting on the scene because, you don't want a good tragedy to go to waste. A 5'2" man attempting to go down the hole, however, to no avail, as by nightfall the man had to retreat from the hole after going no deeper than 5 meters. Also, while this was happening, Owaki and Yoshida were looking on helplessly, although Yoshida, not only sweating much more than Owaki, was also trembling at the sight. Why? Not sure. By this point, Owaki sets up camp and goes to sleep for the night. That night, he had a nightmare. But not just any nightmare. He had a nightmare that he was Nakagaki, the guy who went into the hole. Submerged in pitch black and trapped, the man stating that the hole must have been deformed from the earthquake and can't move any further or backwards, screaming for help. This causes Owaki to scream out, awaking in a cold sweat, thanking God that it was just a nightmare. He wonders to himself if the man was rescued by this point, as it's been over a night since the rescue team showed up, and maybe they were able to figure out a way to help him. Owaki then leaves his tent, to which he sees Yoshida just standing there outside his tent silently. How long she's been standing there, not sure. Owaki asks her if there was any word on Nakagaki and whether he's been rescued or not. Yoshida meekly saying that he's still missing. Yoshida then asks Owaki if he could come with her, as she has something to show him. Of course, Owaki asks what it is that she wants to show him, to which Yoshida responds, "I found my hole." Apparently, Yoshida, over the course of the night, was venturing further down to the foot of the fault to see if she could find her hole. And, well, she did. Yoshida and Owaki arrive at the hole, and we see a panel of the hole itself, to which Owaki remarks that it does kind of look like her silhouette. Yoshida stating, "It's identical to me." To which Yoshida starts to shake and sweat even more profusely. This concerns Owaki, grabbing her, asking what's wrong. Yoshida just going on about how terrified she is and that they dug this hole for her, convinced that this is indeed her hole. Owaki, of course, just going, "What? Come on, that's just a coincidence." However, this doesn't make her feel better, as she is still very convinced that this is her hole. And when she goes into it, she'll be stuck like Nakagaki. You know, interestingly enough, there's something you've probably noticed, especially with Yoshida. Despite her saying that she's terrified of this hole, her language, despite her desire not to go in the hole, she speaks as if going into the hole is inevitable and that it will happen. Almost like something about the hole is compelling her to go in. After that, we still have the newscasters reporting on Nakagaki, who is still missing without a trace, but then the crowd starts to notice something happening at the holes. Some dude with glasses in his underwear is climbing the holes upwards towards the top, which of course causes people to yell at him to get down from there, because if he falls, it's gonna be a nasty fall. To which the naked glasses wearing man turns to the crowd, points to the hole and says, "This is my hole. It was made for me." Just as a brief aside, if you couldn't tell by me just laughing, this is one of those panels in Junji Ito mangas that have been massively memed over time. It's been memed pretty hard on. Just to give you an example, here is a few handpicked memes of this specific panel. Please enjoy. And you may be wondering why that is, as in context, it's pretty horrible, don't get it twisted, as clearly something about these holes are compelling strangers to enter these holes for reasons beyond our understanding. But if I had to guess why I find it so funny, it has to be the image with the words out of context are just funny enough on their own that just elicits a laugh. Clearly not the intent on Junji Ito's part. I just thought I'd mention this. I thought it was pretty funny to note. Anyways, the man tosses his glasses, all bug-eyed, insistent on having to go in the hole for reasons unknown, before asking a last request of the crowd: "Tell my mom goodbye," before inserting himself into the hole, only to disappear. But it gets worse, as he wasn't the only one to do so, as the crowd starts exclaiming that even more people, one by one, are going into the holes, which just turns the situation into a frenzy of people trying to stop people from going into the holes. We then cut to a panel of Owaki and Yoshida, in the midst of this situation, Yoshida has completely lost all composure, screaming, "No, I'm scared. I'm going to have to enter the hole. I'm going to die in there." To which Owaki is like, no, you don't have to go in that hole. You'll be fine as long as you don't go in the hole. Yoshida is not convinced though, claiming she can't stop worrying about it, looking to the hole, to which she says, and I quote, "It's just gaping at me. My silhouette's saying, come in. Come into me." That's what it's saying. Before flopping around some more and screaming her lungs out like a banshee. Owaki tells her to get a hold of herself before having the bright idea to fill up the hole with a bunch of rocks, which seems to, for the moment, calm her down. Later on that night, Owaki and Yoshida are both in a tent together. Owaki, trying to be a gentleman, asks her, "Hey, don't you want to be in your own tent? Cause I'm a guy, you're a girl, and we're alone together in this tent." Okay, he doesn't say it like that, but the implication is there. She says she doesn't want to be alone because she's scared, to which he says, "Don't worry, I'm here for you." Then Yoshida says something quite sad, actually. She mentions that since she was a child, she was always alone, and that her parents didn't care for her, or her friends for that matter, which could be true, could be her insecurity speaking, not that it matters. But Owaki, not letting a good opportunity go to waste, simply says the reason she's been afraid this whole time has nothing to do with the hole, but rather her loneliness. Because nothing could be lonelier than that hole, and she has nothing to worry about. She turns to him, seemingly feeling better in his presence, before sharing a tender kiss, which happens off panel, but is obvious what happens. I'll be honest here, I don't think this needed to be in the story. Don't get it twisted, I like me some good romances, but really think about this. What do they even know about each other? What do they even have in common? Nothing. Not really. As far as we know, they met each other at least days ago. They came here for the same reasons. But as far as conversations or relations have been concerned, it has solely been centered around the mystery of the holes. And before this moment, really all Owaki did was just to be there for her and reassure her that everything's going to be okay. I wouldn't say that's enough to warrant a makeout session, in my opinion. Though I guess it could be argued that because she was coming from a very vulnerable place and she's lonely, it could be interpreted that she was simply desperate in a moment of weakness to have someone to connect with. And Owaki was the guy that happened to be there for her. And because he made her feel safe, and it probably also helped his chances that he doesn't look like a ghoul, that I could at least understand why they would end up romantically involved in some way. I just think overall my issue with it just comes down to the fact that their interactions have been so brief that them ending up together just kind of comes out of nowhere, especially considering Owaki hasn't really shown any sort of sexual interest or there being any sort of sexual tension between the two up to this point. So it just feels somewhat forced to just add to the drama of it all. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know what you think down below about this moment. Okay, this is where I'm going to interrupt you guys and say, if you haven't read this story and you really want to read it for yourself, please go read it for yourself. It's recommended. It's in the book Gyo. It's around 20 bucks. So if you want to support Junji Ito and you want to read it for yourself, go buy Gyo. It's definitely worth it just for that story alone. But ultimately, if you don't care about the spoilers, or you don't care, or you've already read this story and you're just interested to hear my analysis of it, then continue watching. I will wait for you guys to leave, for those who decide to not stay. I don't even have a watch. Okay, now all these guys are gone. Let's continue. A panel later, we have another nightmare from Iwaki's perspective regarding the holes. This time, it's of him as a caveman. Held in bondage, and the nightmare is being prosecuted for committing a crime. The other cavemen taking him to the holes in the mountainside. Iwaki's narration mentioning that these holes were made for executing criminals. And if the crime was severe enough, you would be put in the hole and was most certainly a death sentence. And he was about to enter this hole. In pitch black, he felt the cold walls of the stone on his skin, an intense feeling of claustrophobia, impacting his senses, but there was nothing he could do but move forward. He also notes how even if wanting to move backwards, the walls were carved in such a way that it would prevent you from retreating. So there's nothing you could do but move forward. However, as the time passed and the farther and farther he got down the hole, he started to feel his neck being tugged at. And before he knew it, his neck was stretching upward, causing it to get longer. Stretching to the point it should have ripped his head off. But it doesn't. But it wasn't just his neck though either. His arms, his legs, his torso, all of his limbs were starting to stretch and contort to the point into unnatural shapes that they shouldn't be in. As the hole, the farther he got into, started to distort. And by this point, he snaps and just screams out in pain and agony, screaming for help. Man, if you are a person who has such intense claustrophobia, this is probably the scariest thing you can imagine. Hell, I'm not even claustrophobic, and even I think that's pretty fucking scary. Imagine just being stuck in this hole. You can't back out, it's tight, it's uncomfortable, you barely can move your body, but the farther you go in, your arms, your legs, your torso is just distorting, and you're just in pain, and it's awful. It's just really awful to think about. And you're just trapped there. There's nothing you could do other than scream and continue moving forward. That's your options here. God, I'm not even claustrophobic, and even that gives me goosebumps. Holy Jesus. But of course, it was all just a nightmare, Iwaki awaking in a panic and cold sweat, only to realize that Yoshida is missing. Uh-oh. Iwaki walks out of his tent with a flashlight in search for Yoshida, thinking to himself that there's no way she couldn't have gotten that far as it's pitch black out. But then he sees something that worries him. He finds Yoshida's hole, and all the rocks that Iwaki used to fill it with are not in the hole anymore. There's also a pile of clothes next to the hole. Yoshida's clothes. Which of course leads Iwaki to the troubling revelation that in the middle of the night, Yoshida woke up, took her clothes off, and went into her hole. Iwaki, in a state of panic, screams down the hole for her to come back out. But there's no response. Iwaki is just devastated as the woman he created an intimate connection with is now gone forever, which he just shuts down, drops the flashlight, which bounces around on the rocks for a bit until the flashlight lands pointed toward the rock face. Iwaki turns his gaze towards the light and sees a hole in the shape of his silhouette. I think you know where this is going. He stares at the hole, walks towards it, and says, "This is my hole." His eyes now giving a more lifeless look, taking his clothes off before inserting himself into his hole. We then cut to several months later, where we see a panel of the researchers who were responsible for researching Amigara Fault. One of the researchers mentioning that, like the climber informed them, there wasn't just one fault line caused by the earthquake, but two fault lines on Amigara Mountain. And they finally found the second one. The reason it took them so long to find the second fault being that, unlike the other fault they were looking at, this one was just not as big. It's here where the head researcher makes a startling discovery. As remember how at the Amigara Fault there were human-shaped holes like the first one? Well, there are holes here too, except for one major difference. The holes look nothing like the holes at the other fault, noting that they look nothing like human beings and are just formless shapes that look more like a serpent with multiple legs than actual human beings. One of the researchers speculates if the holes are connected directly to the other holes at the other fault line, to which he, well, takes a look inside one of the holes with a flashlight. And what he sees scares the absolute dog shit out of him. To which we end the story on a panel of this malformed creature. That must have been one of the humans who entered the holes, that is not only alive, but slowly making its way toward the exit of the hole. And that was the Enigma of Amigara Fault. So, conclusions. What did I think of the story? Is it worth the read? And is it scary? Yes, absolutely. Now, like I hinted at, do I think it's personally the scariest story that I've read of Junji Ito's? Personally, no. In my opinion, I still feel that The Long Dream is a much scarier story, which, by the way, if you haven't seen my video on that, you can click it here or wherever I put it. I think that mainly comes down to the fact that I don't have claustrophobia, so it doesn't really hit the same way it would for me as it does for other people. That being said, I do understand why people feel that it's the scariest story they have personally read of Mr. Ito's work, because it is scary. I mean, the idea of being compelled to find a specific hole in the mountains for reasons even you don't understand, and then for seemingly no reason, as if you're being forced by something completely supernatural, inserting yourself into said hole, leading to your demise under the veil of tragedy that happened by the way of nature. A massive earthquake that displaced or deleted people off of the face of the earth is just awful to think about. Even just the themes that are mashed together to make the story what it is, confinement and compulsion, is scary to think about in the context of this story. But there is a theme I didn't mention yet. Specifically speaking, how do I want to talk about this that wouldn't anger YouTube? Alt F4ing out of Minecraft. By the way, I apologize if it sounds like I'm making a joke out of you know what, if you get what I'm alluding to. If YouTube wasn't so scared of other users talking about certain subjects affecting their ability to make dollary dues for their ad revenue, I wouldn't have to censor myself just to make sure this video reaches the algorithm. So, yeah, I apologize. Anyways, like I was saying, there is a strong allusion to the idea of Alt F4ing, because even in the story, Yoshida, even though he was comforted by Owaki to keep her safe, someone who she admitted to was lonely and had no one else in her life that cared for her, even for a moment, finding an intimate connection with Owaki, still felt compelled to enter that hole. And when Owaki discovered this, and by accident discovering his own hole, as if he lost the will to live out of seeming despair over losing someone he had just made an intimate connection with, entered his hole ostensibly by a compulsory force against his own will to end it all. And it makes actual sense. For example, Sigmund Freud theorized about why people would be compelled to Alt F4 out of Minecraft, something that he called the call of the void. The compulsion to do something that would lead to the end of one's own mortality, such as jumping off a cliff once you're near it, or say jumping in front of a train once the train is entering the station. And the story of Amigara Fault seems to hint at that, as remember that panel of the one dude in his underwear like climbing into the hole going, "This is my hole, this was made for me." You know, the memeable one. Even he asks the group of people one simple request: tell my mom goodbye, which is not unheard of when people who commit Alt F4 to leave a final message to their family or loved ones before committing the final act. Now, do I think that's the sole reason for why Junji Ito wrote the story? No. In fact, in interviews, he doesn't really allude to any themes, as even in an Anime News Network interview, which I never thought I would ever bring up again in my life, this is what he actually had to say. The Enigma of Amigara Fault began with the image of a hole in the shape of a person. From there it becomes a question of, what if the hole was a perfect fit for you? Who would have made it and where it might lead? I think if someone were actually inside of that hole, that they'd end up with an intense sensation of being trapped. A part of this is tied to my own fears, like the dissonance you feel when you hear your voice recorded or you see yourself on video. That kind of unpleasantness that comes from looking at yourself from the outside. Doppelgangers are something I'm really fond of conceptually, and I think the concept is applicable to Amigara, end quote. So yeah, while I don't know for sure if that was an intent of his to have that as a theme intentionally in his story, the implications of said story would lead one to believe it is, as even I believe that's a theme that's present in the story as well as many others. In any case, would I recommend this story? Yes, 100 times yes. It's most definitely worth reading, and even though it's not absolutely my favorite story from him, at least in regards to his short stories, I totally see the appeal. It's uncomfortable, it's scary, it's thought-provoking, it's unique, it's the whole package. Now, if you want to read this story for yourself and you want to support Junji Ito, it is available through the story Gyo as a bonus chapter. In fact, I believe it's the last chapter of the book, and you can pick it up for around 20 bucks on Amazon. Or if you don't have 20 bucks to spare, well, I hope you like sailing the seven seas. It is an option. I don't condone it personally, but I understand it. And before I finish this video, as I've been talking about, you know what? I would think it would be uncouth of me to not offer you, the viewer, whoever it may pertain to, considering I've been using the Alt F4ing out of Minecraft allegory to talk about it. If you are in a dark place right now, and Jesus, my hair looks like shit, I apologize. If you are in a dark place right now and you are considering ending it all, don't. It's not worth it. Whether you realize it or not, there are people out there that care for you. If you have friends or family and you are feeling that way, give them a call. Ask them to go out for coffee or lunch. And if they really care about you, they will listen. They will be there for you, even in your darkest hour. It's better to do that than permanently punching your ticket. And I don't speak from a shallow sense of obligation, because I have been through this myself. In fact, I want to relate to you a story. It's a very real story that happened to me almost a decade ago, back when I was like 18. I believe I was 18 anyway. I used to work at a Home Depot, and I hated that job. I worked as a lot attendant. Basically, I would push carts and stuff, but I would also help load like bags of concrete and bricks and all this other stuff into people's cars. And it was in California, so when it was super hot, it was so hot, it was ridiculous. I would get sunburns. It was not fun. But I also just didn't really love my job. I just didn't have a good time with it. And this was one of my lowest points in my life. One night after I finished work, I just was off. I just did not feel right. I felt like I had no hope. I felt like that maybe I should end it. But I did do something that I decided to do, which was important, but it didn't really help me in this case. I ended up calling my mom as I was heading home. And I talked to her, and I was relating to her like these very, very depressed thoughts I was having, and like I was not feeling good. I was not feeling in a good place. And she kind of just did this shallow, placating thing that some people do, like, "Oh, cheer up, you'll be fine." Like that kind of thing that people who are depressed never want to fucking hear, because it just sounds not only so shallow, but it just sounds like you don't really care. And maybe she just didn't realize it. Maybe she didn't realize how depressed I was in that moment, and that she didn't realize how dark in a place I was. But that didn't help. And so I decided, because I took a train, I took light rail to get to and from my work to my home. And as I got onto the platform, waiting for the train, I seriously thought that night about jumping in front of a train as it came by. Yeah, I was not in a good place. And right as I was waiting for this train, I was just waiting for it to happen. I was waiting for my moment to just jump in front of that train. But ironically, someone who was on the platform with other people as well, some gangly white guy with almost like hippie hairdo, that like hair down to the shoulders, not like mine. Mine's super long, but it was like hair almost down to the shoulders. Had a mustache, just like me. Not exactly like me, but he had a mustache. And he just kind of looked over at me, and he must have saw that I was just not in a good place. So he looked at me, and he's like, "Hey man, are you okay?" And I looked at him like, "No, I'm not okay. I'm not okay at all." And the guy, for some reason I will never understand, walked over to me, kneeled down, put his hand on my shoulder, and he just said, "Hey man, I see you're in a dark place, but I just want you to know something that's very important. Jesus loves you." I mean, I know some people's reaction to that story or reaction to that is like, "Oh my God, get the fuck out of here." And normally I would have been that way too. Normally I would have been like, "Oh, fuck off with this Jesus loves you thing." But ironically, through him talking to me and through preaching to me about the love of Jesus Christ and, the love of God and all this other stuff to me in my darkest moment, that was exactly what I needed in that moment. And that night, I did not decide to throw myself in front of a train. And I was it was like, I'm not religious by any means. I'm not religious. I don't know if I believe in a God or a higher power. But that night, I almost became a believer, because it made me think that maybe, even just for a brief second, that someone was looking out for me through this man and decided to use this man as a vessel to tell me that your time is not up. You have plenty more to live for. And I'm glad that I made it out of that situation. I'm glad I managed to not go through that ever again, and that I realized that I do have a lot to live for. And yeah, so that's really all I got to say for that story. That being said, seriously, talk to a friend, talk to a family member, and if you don't have anyone like that, I'm going to leave a prevention hotline number right down below in the description, as well as right here in the video. So just so you know, you always have someone to talk to, and it will get better. I promise. And with that, I just want to say thank you for watching. Seriously, I appreciate everyone who watches my content. The last video had a pretty good response. I can only hope that the positive reception gets bigger. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, again, subscribe to the channel. It literally costs nothing. Hit the bell. Also, like the video if you like the video and you want to see more like it. And share the video with someone who you think might like my content. They would definitely help the channel a lot. And if you have any suggestions for future stories to cover, again, leave them down below in the form of a comment. I would be interested to see what stories you recommend to me for me to cover. And as always, I'm your boy Axecept. Have a nice day, night, and whatever makes you happy. And keep it real. Peace. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.